there is a marketing campaign that I think is just gold to try to attract people back to tourism, and it's based around cannabis. And to talk more, we want to bring in John Lipford. He's an affiliate professor of hospitality and tourism management at Grand Valley State University. Great to have you with us, Professor. How are you today?
Hey, I'm great. How are you, Ronnie and Tyler?
We'll be better if Mother Nature would give us a little bit more sunshine instead of the storms.
Please.
I heard that, and that can help Gary's plants, too.
That is so true. So tell us a little bit more about the industry as a whole. Is it hard to attract students to want to go into the industry, especially coming out of the pandemic?
So actually, we're framing it differently. We're saying there's no better time to enter this industry, and that's for a few reasons. Yes, the industry was hit really hard by COVID because, travel and tourism was not forefront on people's minds, and all the regulations that were passed pretty much prevented robust travel. So now we are awakening from that, and trust me, it's an abrupt awakening. I went to Disney a few weeks ago with my children, and you wouldn't know that we were in the middle of a pandemic anymore. And so I think there's pent-up demand for this type of tourism, not cannabis tourism, but any sort of tourism. I think people have grown tired of being at home, and they're ready to get out and explore our state. And we've seen a lot more in-state travel, at least in 2021, and that's what's projected kind of for the rest of this year, is people gradually getting out, but then we'll see what happens. However, many individuals lost their jobs, and I do want to, express my condolences to those people who are now looking for work or are in different fields completely. But the fact of the matter is hotels, restaurants, tourism, attractions, and otherwise need to manage and they need to restaff now. And so that's where kind of our pipeline comes in with our students and us saying there's no better time to get into this industry.
Right, and from a student standpoint as well, to be able to negotiate. Because before it was like, this is what, the job offer is, take it or leave it. Now there's a little bit of wiggle room for negotiations.
That's right. So we're very optimistic, but I guess only time will tell over the next couple of years whether we can, these vaccines hold up primarily. I know France, as a way to incentivize people to get vaccinated, just came out the other day with the requirement that if you want to go to the cafe, if you want to go to a bar, you want to go to a restaurant, you need to show proof of either vaccination or a recent negative COVID test. So part of me wonders whether we will see regulations like that, although I like what Michigan's doing in terms of incentivizing it through the lottery. Right now, give people a chance to win some money, any way to get us, in a position where we can safely go back out without harming others.
So as, the students start to head back into the classrooms, one of the classes that you offer, a cannabis tourism class. Tell us more about that. Okay,
so it's called HTM 242, Cannabis Regulations and Tourism. We didn't just name it Cannabis Tourism because we wanted students to understand that this is not necessarily endorsing it as a niche of tourism. It's accepting the reality that it's here now and how to best navigate it. So, my experience with cannabis really began in 2010 when one of my best friends at the age of 29 was diagnosed with cancer. And he was able to use it, as a therapeutic relief, but also as something to de-stress, to unwind, to not give him that fear of impending death. He did pass away about 10 months later, and once I then began at Grand Valley, my first assigned course was hospitality, law, and legislation. Now, in that course, we cover all the laws that one may encounter as a manager in this industry, but one of the more difficult propositions is when you have conflicts between federal and state law. And so at the time, California was the only jurisdiction that had medicinal use legalized. And so I began to at least briefly mention it because I said, watch marijuana. It's the outlier because we're seeing some states being able to pass these laws with a pinky swear, basically, from the Department of Justice, saying that they weren't going to come in and enforce their federal regulations. But then over the course of time, my conversations in class kept getting longer and longer and longer. And then Colorado and Washington went. And I remember Seattle and Denver played in the Super Bowl that year. So it was a real Super Bowl was the fun in class, right? But the thing was, we started to see weddings that had cannabis theme. We started to see tours of grow facilities out in Colorado and Washington. And it became clear to me at that time that this was going to become something. And so once, Prop 1 passed in Michigan, and then we had, ultimately legal marijuana here for recreational or adult use purposes, then that's when I felt comfortable saying to my unit, look, this may be a good time to begin this type of formal education. And what I've seen is I'm not alone. There are sporadic offerings across the nation. I was just told by a colleague that the Today Show this morning had a piece on increased educational access to cannabis-based curricula. So far, so good. The first offering of this course was in fall 2019. The demand has been really interesting because I'm not just getting hospitality and tourism management students. I'm getting students from the healthcare fields, legal studies, criminal justice, sociology, supply chain management, HR management, marketing, public health. They're all wanting more education on it. And unfortunately, mine is the only class at Grand Valley currently that pertains to this subject, but it is the only cannabis-based tourism course in the nation in terms of at a reputable undergraduate institution.
And what's with that too, because we know is that partially to do with the issue of the federal laws, and there are federal dollars tied to universities.
That's the thing, is I think a lot of universities, at least from my research, are hesitant because on the one hand, they have policies in place for students that say, you are not to use, you are not to possess, you are not to do X, Y, and Z. And then they receive federal funding. And I know there is some concern about losing federal funding for grants and otherwise, but my research has revealed that that's simply not been the case. It's more so been, I think, the historical stigma associated with this substance. I mean, when we look at alcohol prohibition, that was only 13 years. And then we look at cannabis prohibition, that's, nearly 80 years. And that does a lot to the collective consciousness of America in terms of the media we're consuming and the messaging that's coming from that. I'm looking at the commercials from the 80s and 90s from the Partnership for a Drug-Free America, which, between you and I, my understanding is, and I guess everyone watching, my understanding is the ones who, paid for those commercials were essentially tobacco companies, alcohol companies, and pharmaceutical companies. So I start to see the hypocrisy on some levels, especially as compared to alcohol. But, I think it really is more of a shift in mindset that is slowly taking place. Most recent Pew figures say 90% of Americans are in favor of at least medical cannabis. And then it's a bipartisan majority support now, which I can't say we have many things in this country that we have bipartisan support for, but this is one of them. And just yesterday, we may see some progress because the MORE Act, the Marijuana Opportunity and Reinvestment and Expungement Act, has now been introduced in the Senate by Majority Leader Schumer.
So with that, and we do know that it's been an issue for a while, and the federal laws need to come in line with the state laws. We've had, Q on several times talking about the difficulty for them that have some of the dispensaries and the other, storefronts and this, that, and the other with banking. So when we're talking about tourism, that's a big part of it too, is the money aspect and the federal laws and how they all come together. So with this class, it's become so popular. Do you expect it to expand?
That's a really good question. My hope is down the road that there will be more offerings in terms of actual credentialing, right? Because one course is one course, but my hope would be that we'll start seeing more, maybe certificates or credentialing for non-degree seeking students. So those who may come back and they're in the industry, maybe they're coming from hospitality and now they work in cannabis, but they just want an understanding of the product that they are now selling and marketing. We'll see what happens. I'm not sure.
But could this also be a big draw to get people back to traveling and to bump up tourism coming out of the pandemic? Because we have seen that a lot of the local communities that have opted in, they're benefiting now from the sales tax.
I am so glad you brought that up. The most recent figures I saw were that those municipalities that have opted in, and we're not talking about many, we're talking about 20% of our 1,773 municipalities in the state. Only 20% have opted in. The other 80% have said no for now. but they are reaping the benefits from it. I saw figures that were $60,000 to $70,000 in tax revenue per retailer within the community. And the problem is that pie will shrink as more communities opt in. But we've seen ones that got on board early on. So I'm looking at Muskegon, Ann Arbor, Kalamazoo, here closer to Grand Rapids, Lowell, Michigan. And then, even further south, I don't want to leave out any communities. There's Kalkaska, Morenci, Everett. These small communities that have decided to take the chance, I think, are reaping the benefits. And what we see as a common theme with those communities is usually they're located along a major corridor within the state. Many of them are located near the Ohio border, the Indiana border, and then along corridors of travel for people coming from other states going up north for our outdoor recreation experiences. So I think when we look at who is a cannabis tourist, the biggest mistake that individuals may make, whether it's in government or in industry, is assuming that you know who a cannabis tourist is. They are not homogeneous, and they are as varied and diverse as really any tourism segment. And so we're seeing people who are practical tourists, meaning they may be coming from Ohio or Indiana or otherwise just to purchase product because their jurisdiction does not allow them to. We have those who are pleasure oriented, meaning they're coming and they want to just add it as part of their journey. That's what I really see as a niche that's going to be up and coming. We have those who are experimental, and these are the ones I worry about the most, coming into the state, and maybe they've never used or very seldom used, or it's been decades. And then, maybe they eat an edible and combine it with alcohol, and the next thing you know, they're in a difficult spot. And so our hospitality and tourism community has to be in a position to help them. And then my favorite, I think, is the quest for authenticity folks who are looking basically for tours of grow facilities. They want to be like, as Gary was mentioning, as hands-on as he is with his vegetables and fruits and otherwise. They want to be as hands-on with the product as that so they can learn as much as possible. And I think a good model for all of this is up north in Smiths Falls, Ontario, Canada, which housed a former huge Hershey's plant. And that went defunct, and now that's been bought up by Canopy Growth Company, and they have retrofitted this whole facility. It's open for tours. Smiths Falls is reaping the benefits because they approach it in the same way as other consumption-based commodities like wine tourism. So they really look at vititourism and say that's where the biggest parallel is. Some say craft beer tourism, but I would say wine tourism is the most appropriate one. And that's what we're kind of seeing. And I hope we'll continue to see as folks come to enjoy our natural resources here in the state.
What a fascinating class, but also an interesting field to continue to study. John Lipford with us here on the MegaCast, affiliate professor, hospitality and tourism management at Grand Valley State University. John, we so appreciate your time.
Sure. I'm happy to help any way I can. One more thing, two more things. Number one, my main thing is education and risk aversion and youth avoidance of this product. There's plenty of studies out there that say the age of 25 is when people should begin using, so it does not impact their brain. So I want to get that message out there to our youth. I'm a father, and I'm also a son, and it's my mom's 80th birthday today, so I want to wish her a happy birthday on air here while I have a chance, and I hope she'll appreciate that.
Happy birthday, Mom.
Yes.
Well, it's been great having you. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, everyone.